President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has been sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison. This came as a surprise to many, considering prosecutors recommended close to 25 years for the bank and tax fraud crimes. Those charges are not related to the Trump campaign.
Manafort appeared in a wheelchair during yesterday's hearing and asked the judge for compassion. He said, quote, "To say I am humiliated and ashamed would be a gross understatement." Paula Reid has been following the story.
This was the first time in this entire case where we actually got to hear from Paul Manafort, but he did not apologize or express any remorse. And the judge remarked that he was surprised not to hear more regret from Manafort. Then the judge had a surprise of his own, sentencing Manafort to just a fraction of what was recommended.
He accepts responsibility for his conduct.
Paul Manafort, sitting in a wheelchair because of complications from gout, said before his sentencing that he feels pain and shame, adding, "My life, professionally and financially, is in shambles." After a short recess, it was Judge T.S. Ellis's turn to speak. He called the charges undeniably serious and said Manafort made choices to engage in criminal conduct. But Judge Ellis then seemed to give the former Trump campaign chairman the benefit of the doubt, saying that Manafort lived an otherwise blameless life and he has engaged in lots of good things. Ellis called the recommended sentence of 19 to 24 years behind bars excessive and handed Manafort a term of nearly 4 years.
Lock him up!
Manafort had agreed to cooperate with the Mueller investigation last September, but the agreement fell apart. Prosecutors say Manafort lied repeatedly to the special counsel's office, the FBI, and a grand jury.
You know, Paul Manafort worked for me for a very short period of time.
The president has sought to distance himself from his former campaign chairman. But Manafort was a public part of his campaign, even defending then-candidate Trump against charges of Russian collusion on CBS This Morning.
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
While they stopped working together in August of 2016, Manafort's strategy has always been to angle for a presidential pardon.
And one of the reasons I respect Paul Manafort so much is he went through that trial. You know, they make up stories. People make up stories. This whole thing about flipping, they call it.
Next week, Manafort will be sentenced by a different judge in a separate case here in Washington, D.C. Now, this judge has been pretty tough on Manafort throughout that case, and she will also need to decide whether or not he can serve whatever sentence she issues at the same time as his sentence from Virginia, or whether or not he'll have to serve them consecutively. Vlad and Marie.
All right, Paula, thank you so much. So we spoke to CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman earlier on CBSN AM, and she gave us reaction to Manafort's sentencing.
I found the sentence stunning, and I think that's my most gentle word that I can use on air. In the scheme of things, it is one thing to depart from the guidelines. You have to understand what the sentencing guidelines are. They were designed by looking at cases all around the country. It was done over a long period of time so that you could have fundamental fairness. That is, if you had a case in the Eastern District of Virginia, or you had a case in California or Maine or Idaho, that basically these guidelines would tell judges, when you exercise your discretion, do it within these terms. Doesn't mean a judge is not able to downward depart or even upward depart for various reasons, but they are guidelines for a reason. It's one thing to depart down from 19.5 to 24 years and say to have given him 10 to 15. I mean, I understand that, but to give him 47 months where he has already done about 9 months because he has been in jail pending these cases, and he'll get a little bit of time off for good time. I mean, we're talking about a 3-year sentence for over 10 years of criminal activity.
So last year, this judge, T.S. Ellis, gave a convicted meth dealer 40 years in prison. It was the man's first serious offense. Judge Ellis said that was excessive, but that he had no choice. how much leeway do judges actually have? I think if you're a member of the public, you're looking at these two and you're saying, why did this individual have to go to jail for 40 years for his first serious crime? And you just said Paul Manafort was a proven record of crimes that date over 10 years.
Well, the problem will be discussed, I think, all over the country about judges who exercise their discretion outside of the guidelines. It's not only the difference of the meth dealer versus the white-collar criminal. It is, frankly, the white-collar criminal versus any other kind of crime. And we have to say it. It is the difference of the white defendant versus the person of color. I had practiced in the courts for 19 years, and I know that my white-collar clients got less time than violent criminals or people of color, even in a non-violent crime, but not this level. I was at a point where if I had been one of the defense lawyers in this case and that the judge had done that, I think I would have lost my balance. I would have been almost faint. You know, you want to go and bow at the judge's feet for getting a sentence this light. I think by any standards it is highly inappropriate. And in addition, the judges often will listen intently to what we call the right of allocution. That is, when the defendant says what he is allowed to say at sentencing, it's a person expressing remorse, saying they're sorry, apologizing. You did not get any of that. The only thing Paul Manafort was sorry about was that it put his family through some pain that he did it. Or in other words, he got caught.
Right.
It was really an amazing sentence.
Yeah. So meantime, he's going to be facing another sentence in D.C. It's a separate case. Do you think that yesterday's outcome will have any impact on this case, or are they completely separate things?
They are completely separate cases, and they are separate charges. Remember this. This is a fraud case that we're dealing with in Virginia for the sentence yesterday. When we go to Washington on Wednesday the 13th, you are dealing with conspiracy against the United States and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You're dealing also with someone whose bail was taken away for intimidation of a witness. You're dealing with someone where a judge has already said that his plea could be taken away because he did lie to prosecutors. So you've got a lot of what you may consider much more serious or dastardly in Washington than you have in Virginia. Now, is the judge supposed to consider the sentence in Virginia? Theoretically, she is supposed to consider only the case before her, but I will bet you that it is argued in front of her about the case in Virginia.
So we can now step back to point out something that we were saying before the commercial. I want to quote Neil Katyal. He was the former acting Solicitor General of the United States, Supreme Court lawyer. He wrote this: remember, 47 months for Trump's top campaign official is a big deal, even if guidelines called for more. And he went on to say if Obama's top person went to jail for even a day, we would never stop hearing about it. So for a top campaign official to work on a campaign for the presidency of the United States, putting aside for a moment the sentencing guidelines, is 47 months a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal if you are looking at the fact that he was Trump's campaign head of Trump's campaign for a time.
Campaign chairman.
Campaign chairman, thank you. But that's because of the person that he is. And we often have said, how do we look at a person? How do we define you? We define you by the people you surround yourself with. So yes, it is in fact, that would have been the headline, I think, if he had gotten somewhere between, say, 6 and 12. That would have been the headline. But when you go down to 47 months, less than the defense had asked for, the headline changes. So it depends on through what is your looking glass.
Right.
Where are you looking from?
Right.
What about this business of a possible pardon? You know, how likely is that? Will that even have an impact on the D.C. case, or pardon doesn't make a difference for that one? Well,
I think the pardon should make no difference to Judge Jackson in D.C., nor should it have made any difference to Judge Ellis. What will be, will be. But certainly one could hypothesize that when the defense lawyers came outside and made a comment, the comment they made was that this was not about Russian collusion. By the way, we know it was not about Russian collusion. Right. He was not charged with that. Right. It was excluded from the case specifically. But one could argue, doesn't mean it's the truth, you could just make the argument that that mention from the defense was a signal about a pardon in the future. I would say this, I'm not a political analyst, I'm purely a legal analyst, but I would say that a pardon is highly unlikely until after the 2020 election.
Good point. Good point.
Well, we'll see if he makes it. I mean, I'm not for nothing, but he looked pretty rough in those sketches, you know?
I just want to add one thing. Yes, his health is bad, but he has gout. And yes, he's in a wheelchair for whatever it is, for whatever reason. But there are prison facilities where these things can be handled, and he has asked that he be transferred to a facility that can deal with his illnesses. Prison facilities have been dealing with elderly people, and I, of course, do not like to consider 69 as elderly. And they have been dealing with people who have very, very serious conditions all the time. This is not an exception.
Rikki Klieman. Does she love it when Rikki comes by?
I mean, this is we go to school every time.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, it's really great.
Thank you so much, Rikki.